Hello, everybody. So it's Mikhail and me back again, and very good evening to all of you. Last week, Mikhail was alone, and this week we are both together again. So I was in Kuala Lumpur enjoying myself, speaking and eating a lot of food. so I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation, and basically, last few days I've been asked a few questions, and I know that these must be common questions which a lot of you have. So here I am. Okay. So this is week 4. It's been quite a journey, right? So what are some of the common questions that Mikhail and I get a lot of? Number one is, how can I live without carbohydrates? Will fasting cause muscle loss? Our brains need sugar to function. So if I don't eat sugar, how will my brain get the fuel? Is fasting the same as starvation? And what is the difference between fasting and low calorie diet? Now, how can I live without carbohydrates is not something I'm going to talk in details about, because Mikhal and I did a video, so I'll send that link. In fact, we have quite a few free videos available, and if you haven't seen them, I'm just going to post a link so that you can go through them at your leisure. So the next question is, will fasting cause muscle loss? So in simple words, the answer is no. So if you are not somebody who's interested in knowing all the, the medical minutia and the biochemistry and all of that, the answer for you is very simple. It's a no. I've started listening to my son. He says, Ma, not everybody is interested in knowing all the details, all the science. Some of us just need to know this is this and this is that, and what do we have to do? So I decided I should start listening to him more often, maybe. So does fasting cause muscle loss? Now, the thing is, if you look at evolution, our hunter-gatherer ancestors have been, fasting and feeding since forever. It's just that in the last several years, we've had constant access to food. In fact, it's actually happened in my own lifetime that we have constant access to food. When we were growing up, we didn't have this kind of constant food availability that is there now. So obviously, if our hunter gatherer ancestors were fasting and feeding, obviously they couldn't afford to lose muscle, right? Because if they were not able to feed themselves, they would have to go and hunt. And to hunt, you would need your muscles. So, in terms of evolution, of course, it doesn't make sense that you should lose muscle when you fast. And the other thing that happens when you fast is your glucose requirement fall drastically during fasting, and the body feeds on fatty acids, and the brain feeds on ketone bodies. And truthfully, lots of clinical studies are there. If some of you are interested in knowing all the medical minutia, the biochemistry and all of that, the tons of studies which have actually tracked how much protein you're breaking down, how much muscle loss you're actually having. It has not shown a loss of muscle mass, and protein breakdown is usually reduced during fasting. So obviously your body is not going to, self-preservation is the number one thing your body is interested in. So obviously fasting is not going to cause all the problems which will make you be less healthy. Then the other interesting thing is growth hormone. Now, growth hormone is one hormone which is probably not discussed a whole lot about. But the interesting thing is, and I'm just going ahead of myself because all of you are going to wonder, where did growth hormone suddenly come up from? Fasting increases your levels of growth hormone. So why do you need growth hormone in your body? So number one is it helps retain lean tissue. In fact, some studies have shown that the ability of the body to retain your muscle mass while fasting is probably because of the growth hormone. Then growth hormone helps maintain body composition, cell repair, metabolism. And for those of you who are a lot into exercise and things like that, it increases muscle growth, strength, and exercise performance. It helps in exercise recovery. And obviously, lower growth hormone levels have been associated with worse health. And as we age, our growth hormone levels do reduce. So, what are some of the things, important things to bear in mind when you're talking about growth hormone? Excess body fat reduces levels of growth hormone. Therefore, obviously, fat loss would increase growth hormone levels. And our beloved hormone insulin keeps coming back. So, high insulin levels may reduce growth hormone levels too. So, as Michal and I have mentioned before, your body fat problem or challenge losing excess body fat is a problem of hormones and biochemistry. And insulin is one of the major hormones because it is the fat fertilizer hormone. So, how do you know whether you have lower growth hormones? Truthfully, growth hormone levels, they fluctuate so much that it's not easy to measure them. So instead of actually measuring growth hormone levels, we can measure something called IGF-1. So that is called insulin-like growth factor 1. Now, don't bother about it because usually I don't measure IGF-1 in my patients in India because obviously it costs a lot of money. In Canada, Dr. Iyer does measure IGF-1. So IGF-1 is, again, it's something that needs to be at optimal levels because excessive IGF-1 levels have also been associated with high risk for cancer and, worse prognosis on cancer. So I know many of you would want to know, how do I know if I have low growth hormones? So if you want to, you can definitely test this. But IGF-1 levels are also regulated by a whole lot of other things. So what can you do to naturally increase your growth hormone levels? And I'll talk a little bit about, using growth hormone as well, because I know many of you are thinking that. So the best ways to do that are, number one, of course, lower carbohydrate diet, lower sugar intake, and not eating too near your bedtime. So we've discussed this before, no food after 7 p.m. And again, a lot of it is related to your insulin sensitivity. Exercise, particularly high intensity exercise, is known to increase your growth hormone levels. Then fasting, and of course, sleep. So do we recommend growth hormone supplementation to people? Personally, in my practice in India, I don't. And in Canada as well, Dr. Iyer, I don't think she does because I don't think it's available in Canada to be given to people unless they have a growth hormone deficiency as a child, and that's a different story. That's not what I'm talking about today. But the interesting thing is when the other hormones are balanced, growth hormone can go up naturally, and actually exercise and fasting and a low carbohydrate diet are probably some of the best ways to increase your growth hormone levels. So this is the other question. The brain needs sugar. Really? Yes, the brain needs sugar, of course. But you know what? Your brain is capable of using your body's fat stores. So my point is, you do not have to eat sugar for your brain to get that sugar. See, can you imagine? Again, I keep going back to evolution. So let us say our hunter-gatherer ancestors don't get to eat anything at all. And they, of course, did not eat sugar. But anyway, they did not get to eat anything. Do you think they would die? They definitely need their brain a whole lot more when they didn't have enough food, because they'd have to use their brains to find out where they could go and get some more food, or where could they hunt. For all of that, they need better brain function. So in terms of evolution, of course, it doesn't make sense. And the more important thing is, your body is designed in such a fantastic way that your body can make the sugar for the brain. So if you eat sugar, it will use that easily available sugar and leave your body's fat aside. So therefore, you will store fat if you continue to eat sugar. And sugar and carbohydrates, I mean, in the same way. So if you are not eating sugar and you're not eating carbohydrates, your body can use up your fat stores. So again, sorry about the, a little bit of a technical picture, but I know some of you like this stuff. So fat is stored as triglycerides. So this is my impression of a triglyceride molecule. It has, as you can see, a glycerol, spine, and it has different fatty acids, which are of different chain lengths. So when this breaks up, what happens is the triglyceride breaks down, the glycerol goes to the liver and is turned into sugar. And the fatty acids can be used by most of the body as energy. So nature has designed your body in such a way that you're never going to be left, high and dry without any source of fuel for the brain, particularly because the brain is the big boss. So it gets preference over everything else. Then the next question we get a lot of is fasting is starvation. So is that true? Now, of course, you know where I'm going with that answer. So, as Dr. Jason Fung defines fasting, so fasting is the voluntary act of withholding food for a specific period of time. And we've discussed this before. Fasting is something that almost every religion has it. In terms of evolution, this has been going on for a long time. However, starvation, this is Wikipedia's definition, is a severe deficiency in caloric energy intake below the level needed to maintain an organism's life. So it is the most extreme form of malnutrition. So there's a huge difference in terms of metabolism as well. So starvation, number one, cannot be predicted, versus fasting, you can end it any time when you feel that you're not feeling well. Now, remember that feeling hungry when you're fasting is not a reason to stop fasting. So you should not be feeling like you're going to, suddenly collapse or you're going to pass out or something. That is when you don't need to continue fasting. But feeling hungry is okay. So starvation, because very often some people think, when you say starvation, it's all those, thin, skinny people in concentration camps and, pictures of starving children in Africa or things like that. But that is very different from fasting as we are talking about. So the other difference that a lot of people say is, oh, what's the difference between fasting and a low calorie diet? You're just eating less. So is it just calories? So one of the major myths, and I'm sure I propounded this myth a lot too in the years before, that reducing your daily caloric consumption by 500 calories will reduce your weight loss of about 1 pound of fat per week. But that is not true. So obviously, those of you who've had that experience, you know that it doesn't really work. So eating lesser calorie than the amount required to maintain essential body function reduces your resting metabolic rate. So what is the resting metabolic rate? Essentially, it is the basic level of metabolism which you need for your heart to function, for your brain to function, for the basic metabolic activities to go on. So when you start eating lesser calories than you did before, and when you reach a point which is less than what your body needs to maintain, the body goes into what we used to call the starvation mode. So it will reduce your metabolic rate. And once your metabolic rate is reduced, obviously what happens is you can regain the fat again because your metabolic rate is so low. So that one of the tricks to maintaining long-term fat loss is to make sure that your metabolic rate remains where you're functioning well, right? So fasting is metabolically very different from a low-calorie diet, because what do you do in a low-calorie diet? You're still eating food. And you remember, I think 2 weeks ago on my webinar, I had talked about how different food components, trigger your insulin response. So carbohydrate the most, protein a little bit, fat the least, and fasting not at all. So if you are eating at, 2-hour intervals, this was something that a lot of people talked about. You need to eat 6 times a day. No, that's not true. So when you eat 6 times a day, your insulin never gets to go down to 0, versus when you don't eat at all. So having 300 calories less in one day is very different from having a total of maybe 2100 calories, not having 2100 calories on one day. So metabolically, it's very different. Fasting reduces insulin levels. And as you know, insulin is your fat fertilizer. It increases growth hormone, which keeps you lean, and it raises noradrenaline or norepinephrine, whichever you call it. So all these do not happen on a low-calorie diet. So yes, you can lose fat on a low-calorie diet, but you will regain most of it. And more importantly, it's not even sustainable. So we, on this program, we are not talking about, fat loss or weight loss for just about 1 or 2 weeks. And then after about 6 months, you get back all of them. And as Dr. Iyer, our physician partner from Calgary, says, they don't just come back, they bring their friends along. So that is not what we are looking at. And that is the reason Michal and I talk about permanent lifestyle change. This is not a diet. This is a permanent lifestyle plan for you. So before I go to the reminders, Michal, what else would you like to add to this?
I think, thanks, Dr. Carr. And I think it's really important to stress the difference between fasting and calorie restriction. It's the one thing I find when I deal with my one-on-one clients the most, is that's where people get stuck the most. We've been so programmed to eat less, exercise more in order to lose weight. And if we're not losing weight, do that harder, right? You're just not doing it enough. So do it harder. And if you look at the definition of starvation, starvation can happen on a calorie restricted diet because you are not getting enough energy and nutrients to allow the body to function. And I wanted to explain it, if I may, just a slightly different way, which I think might make sense to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way that the body works is we are very efficient beings. We like to use the least amount of energy to get the most bang for our buck. And what we find is that, especially with caloric restriction, what happens is the body, number one, realizes that over a long-term period of time, because caloric restriction doesn't happen over a day, it's weeks and months. Oh, look, I'm getting less food. Therefore, I have to become more efficient. The same way that we try to be more environmentally efficient and get lights that use less energy in Canada to heat our houses better. The body says, how do I do everything on less? And that's how the metabolism slows down. And this takes a while. And what happens in the brain, though, is the brain starts really looking for ways to get some energy, just in case this eating less or this having less goes on for extended periods of time. So what happens is we start craving sugars, we start craving fatty, carbohydrate-rich foods, like real quick sources of energy, right? Not necessarily the healthiest, the body doesn't care. And what do? We guzzle them down or eat them mindfully. Generally, we guzzle them down because we feel bad. And then we store them right away because the body's like, okay, I'm not quite sure when I'm going to get calories again, so let me just keep these for later. So we don't even absorb any of the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. We become more nutritionally deficient. Our metabolism slows down even more because we're so busy storing stuff for later, we forget to use it. And the cravings become even worse. And anybody who's been on any calorie restricted diet can really understand that process. And what do? We cut calories further, which makes it even worse. Now, what happens in this situation is, as we're storing fat, as you described, human growth hormone goes down. So our muscles start to deteriorate because there is nothing to replace and replenish them, human growth hormone. Now, when we fast, the body isn't saying everything's slowed down. And I'm not talking fast for months on end. I'm talking for your body type, just go without food for a certain period of time. The body's like, oh, okay, don't know where, I don't have any food coming in. So I better go and, as you described, go and get some food. How do I get the most energy to go and get some food? Oh, mobilize some of my stored fat. Now, this process can take a while to kick in, especially if we've been in the other cycle. But there is a definite mobilization of fat tissue when we have nothing, as compared to the storage of the fat tissue when we just have a little bit. The bank account analogy works well too, right? When we have a little bit of money, we always make sure that we save a little bit and we spend a little bit. When we have no money at all, we have no choice but to dig into our savings. And our savings account tends to sit in our bottoms and in our bellies.
Yeah.
And I like wanted to really reiterate this point because people get scared. People get scared about eating nothing. And eating nothing for a defined period of time is way more beneficial. And the research is there than eating little bits over that same period of time. So even if you look at it as eating one meal as compared to eating 6 meals of exactly the same caloric content, you will burn more fat by just eating that one meal because you're taking advantage of that no food.
Yeah. Fabulous, Michal. Your explanation is so wonderful. So on that same vein, now many of you are probably aware of the, what was that? The Big Loser, right? That program on television. And one of the participants, now those of you who don't know, The Big Loser is this program on television, and I haven't seen that actually. So where they kind of, have competitions where people who are grossly overweight, they are in a competition with each other for who can lose the maximum amount of weight. And it is a low calorie diet, and they exercise for, 2-3 hours a day over a period of 6 months, is it?
Yeah, but it's a long period of time.
It's a long period of time. Now, interestingly, one of the participants said, do you realize why they never have a reunion? Because everyone's gained back all that fat. So yes, it's a very successful program on television, but we are not talking about that kind of fat loss. Yes, you want to go for a wedding, your school reunion. Yes, you can, go on a low calorie diet or do whatever you want to, but you have to be prepared to gain back all of that. So that is not what we are looking at. So now on the reminders, now daily check-in on the app. Next week, I want to discuss labs. So I probably won't have time to talk about what I learned over the last 2 weeks of tracking my blood sugar. And truthfully, I haven't even done the analysis because I think somewhere deep down, I'm afraid to see what my blood sugars are like.
Dr. Carr, I have to tell you though, you've said it and you just said it today. What is the counterbalance to a time when you know that you've increased your insulin levels and your blood sugar might be a little higher? What is the counterbalance?
Fasting.
There we go.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's the quickest and easiest way to reduce our insulin levels.
Yeah.
So again, periods of eating and not eating, fasting and feeding actually provide us with a lifestyle where we can enjoy food some of the time when there are times to enjoy it and not have the guilt and not have all that emotional baggage that comes along with that because we have a counterbalance.
Yeah. But again, Michal, and this is my personal, experience is just because I know I have a counterbalance, I think sometimes I overindulge because I know I can fast tomorrow.
And I understand. And part of the strategy, is how do we incorporate this into a lifestyle that's not detrimental?
Yeah.
Right. That we're not doing a binge purge cycle.
No.
We're doing a fast feed cycle.
Yeah.
And those are quite different. And I think as people's fasting journey continues, and we'll discuss this more, fasting has this amazing impact on appetite control.
Yes.
And once we really get into that, people understand that the need or the desire, that physiological desire, so I'm not talking the mental desire, but that physiological desire to overindulge does tend to wane. So it doesn't go away, but it definitely wanes. And then it'll come back a little bit. And then, we give ourselves a little bit of a kick in the you-know-what, and we get back on track, and it resets itself quite easily. So even with what you did, know that it's part of the ebb and flow.
Yeah.
Of real life. This isn't the real loser. This isn't the biggest loser on TV. This is real life.
I know. Yeah, that is the wonderful thing, because I know, and what you said about, hunger is so true. I mean, I have experienced it myself, and I know that most of the days I aim for a 16-8, and of course I don't succeed in a 16-8 every day. And I have the evidence on my app, so I can't lie about that. But I realized the first meal of the day, which is usually for me, it's a brunch at around 11:30, 12 or so. That is a big meal, and I so enjoy the food, I can't tell you. I mean, it's like as if I'm discovering food for the first time in my life in a while. But evening, most of the time I realize I'm eating because I'm bored. And, I come back from work and I'm home and there's nothing much to do because I have set a time after which I'm not going to look at lighted screens. So I'm not watching television and I'm not going to sit in front of my laptop, and I try not to look into my mobiles too. So all those lighted rectangles, get in our way. But yeah, often I've realized it's more from boredom, or it's because the food is there in front of me. I'm not hungry then. So yes, it is possible to overcome hunger. And for many of you, you're probably thinking, when I talk about, yes, you're doing a 12-12, which is very exciting. And many of you in this in 8-week program, I know you have moved into a 12-12. Some of you are already doing a 16-8, and a few of you said 14-10 was like very doable. And that's what I find so exciting. Everyone thinks, oh, this is something I can do. And that wasn't so before when we talked about the low calorie diet. So some of you are already feeling that. You will realize that you're not as hungry. Some of you have shared that with me, that you don't feel as hungry as you did before. So next we'll, of course, if any of you want to share anything that, that you have